How can you determine when to start taking Social Security benefits? Can a debit card help you improve your credit? And can you get out of a timeshare without losing any money? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 16th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Welcome to day 9 of the 31-Day Money Challenge. Yesterday, we looked at 10 money management apps that can help you simplify your finances and get the most out of your money as we transition away from budgeting and reducing expenses and move into issues relating to building your net worth, things like getting out of debt and investing for retirement. I thought today would be a good day to tackle some reader questions that I've received since starting the 31-Day Money Challenge. So I've got a handful of questions on a variety of topics that I'm going to do my best to answer. And that's the plan for today. Before we get there, real quick, our sponsors for the 31-Day Money Podcast, Betterment. Betterment's an online platform that helps you invest your money. You can invest in stocks and bonds. You pick the percentage of each, and Betterment does the rest. They rebalance your investments for you and reinvest dividends automatically. You can check them out at betterment.com. And Personal Capital is a free tool that you get online. It helps you track all of your investments. You simply link your accounts. It'll show you your asset allocation, give you some suggestions, also tell you just how much in fees you're paying, including the fees that your 401k may be charging you. You can check them out at personalcapital.com. Okay, so we've got a number of questions today. Most of them come in via email. I do have a voicemail message. As I've mentioned in past podcasts, you can leave a voicemail. Just go to speakpipe.com/DoughRoller, and you can leave your question or comment there that I may play in a future show. But let me start first with a question from a reader named Nancy. She writes, I will be 67 next week and am thinking of retiring in April. Would it be better to use my 401k until I reach 68 to take my Social Security, or take my Social Security immediately when I retire? Or would it be better to use personal savings and not touch either until I turn 68? Well, that's actually a tough question. Nancy really asks two questions. One is, when should she start taking Social Security? And the second question is, when should she start using her retirement savings? Of course, when you start taking out money from a 401k or IRA during retirement, you're going to have to pay taxes on the money that you take out. And so these are two really good questions if you're getting ready to retire, or maybe just wanting to plan a little bit ahead. And so what I said to Nancy, I emailed her back. And by the way, I respond to every email. Sometimes it takes me a day or two, but I do read and respond to every email. So feel free to shoot me an email at dr@doughroller.net. So I tackled both of these questions as best I could. The first one, when should you start taking Social Security benefits for retirement, is what can be a difficult question. As you may know, there's a full retirement age that varies a little bit depending on when you were born. For me, my full retirement age is going to be 67, but you can take retirement benefits a little earlier than that, and if you do, your monthly benefit will be reduced. Or you can wait and take and wait till even after your full retirement age, up to age 70, and if you do that, your monthly benefits will increase. And of course, one of the tough questions is, we don't know how long we're going to live. If we knew that, then answering this question would be easy, but it's not. So what I recommended to Nancy is that she tried out a number of tools online that help folks make this decision. AARP has one tool that's free, and you put in a bunch of information, and it gives you recommendations on when you might want to start taking Social Security. There are also some paid tools that you can use as well that perhaps give you a little more detail. But that's what I recommended to Nancy. And what I'll do in the show notes is leave links to those tools so that if you or someone you know is trying to figure out this difficult question, you can check out the show notes, check out the links to the various online tools and calculators, and hopefully it will help you make this decision. In terms of taking out money from a retirement account versus living on savings, the bigger question for me is exactly how you're going to be investing your money, whether it's in a taxable account or a tax-deferred account in retirement. And I know for me, I plan to have at least 50% of my investments in stocks, even during retirement. And to some, that may seem aggressive. I personally think 50% in stocks is really the minimum for me. But every financial situation is different. And so what might be right for me may not be right for you. But that's the first thing that I would suggest, is that you figure out what your asset allocation is going to be in retirement, whatever it is, and where you should keep each of those investments. And then for me, the longer I can hold off taking money out of a 401k or IRA, assuming it's a deductible IRA, the better. Now, of course, when you get to 70 and a half, you have to start taking out required distributions, right? But until then, you have some options. And for me, I would hold off withdrawing that money as long as I could, so that I can defer when I have to pay taxes. Again, every situation is different, and so it's a little difficult to respond to these questions in the abstract. You have to do what's right for you. But those are the guidelines that I use and will use as I near retirement. The second question comes from Julie, and she asks, how do debit cards figure into the utilization rate, or do they? And let me put this question into some context. The utilization rate that Julie is referring to is how much of your available credit are you actually using. For example, let's assume you have $10,000 in available credit on your credit cards, and your current balance is $5,000. Well, your credit utilization would be 50%, 5,000 divided by 10,000. And that's an important factor when it comes to your credit score. Credit scoring formulas like FICO use utilization rate as one factor in scoring. So the higher the utilization rate, that is, the closer you are to being maxed out on your revolving accounts like credit cards, all other things being equal, the lower your credit score is going to be. And so it's helpful to have a low utilization rate when it comes to trying to keep your credit score as high as possible. Of course, ideally, as you know from listening to this 31-day money challenge, the real goal is to have no debt. But in terms of your credit score, the lower the utilization rate, the better. Now, how do debit cards factor in to all of this? Well, the short answer is they don't. Debit cards are not a form of borrowing. They are not credit. A debit card is typically linked to a bank account. And when you use a debit card, it simply withdraws the money from your checking account. There's no lending that takes place. And so the use of debit cards really has no impact on a consumer's credit score. Now, it can get a little confusing. If you've ever, used a debit card, say at a grocery store, they'll ask you, is this a debit or credit? Well, you can actually process a debit card as a credit transaction, and that's when things start to get really confusing. But the result is still the same. It comes out of your checking account. And just to kind of explain that a bit, you may know that when you use a debit card, if you do it as a credit transaction, you typically have to sign a receipt or sign the little electric, keypad that they have there. You can sign that. And instead, if you process it if you tell them, no, it's a debit card, then they'll ask for your PIN, and you put in your 4-digit PIN to process the transaction. That's considered a debit transaction or a PIN transaction, as opposed to a credit or signature transaction. Now, again, with a debit card, in both cases, the money comes out of your linked banking account, checking account, regardless of whether you choose a signature credit transaction or a PIN debit transaction. So you might say, well, then does it really matter? Well, many times it doesn't, except that if you want to get cash back at the store, you have to process it as a PIN or debit transaction to get cash back. And by the way, that's a great way, if you need cash, to avoid the fees that you may have to pay if you use an ATM instead. But to answer Julie's question, no, debit cards do not figure into your utilization rate or your credit score at all. They're simply not. They're not credit. And by the way, prepaid cards don't either. I mean, prepaid cards are very, very similar to a debit card, though they're typically not linked to a bank account. But they don't affect your credit either. They don't get factored into your utilization rate. And that ties into this next question, which comes from Shelby. And she writes and says, I am 18 and I have zero credit. My mom told me that I could get a prepaid credit card to build my credit since I hate credit cards because they are a disaster waiting to happen. And I should say I couldn't agree more. She goes on, I want to know how I can build up my credit without getting a real credit card. Is there a way? Well, let me answer the first part of the question. As I alluded to in response to Julie's question, prepaid credit cards do not help you build credit. There was a time when prepaid cards would market this feature where they could help you build a certain type of credit. That is long since is gone, and frankly, it was a horrible feature. It didn't improve or help you build a FICO credit score, and oftentimes they were linked to loans that you would actually have to get at high interest rates. And I think for the most part, all of those are gone today. Prepaid cards today, actually, some of them are quite good with very low fees and are very easy to use. Perhaps the one I recommend the most is the American Express Serve card. I think it's a great option for college students, for teenagers who get jobs and want a place to keep their money. And I'll even link in the show notes to a page where you can check that out. But that doesn't improve your credit. Prepaid cards do not improve your credit. Now, then the second part of her question is, well, then how do I build credit if I don't want to get a real credit card? Now, we're going to be talking a lot more about credit beginning actually tomorrow. But to answer Shelby's question today, there are a couple of ways. Well, one is you can become an authorized user on, in this case, her mom's credit card if she has one, and assuming she has good credit. She doesn't have to actually use the credit card. Just by being an authorized user, she can start to build credit and improve her credit score. The other way would be to get other types of loans. For example, if she were going to go to school and needed an educational loan, she could get a school loan. If she were going to get a loan for a car, she could do that. That would build her credit. Of course, I think the best approach is to go to school without borrowing and to buy a car with cash. And so if that's your approach, it can be very difficult to build your credit. One option would be to go ahead and get a credit card, but with a very, very low credit limit. So if you get a card, for example, with just $250 in credit or perhaps $500 in credit, which if you don't have a credit history might be the kind of credit limit you'd get anyway, and leave it there. If they try to increase your credit, say thanks, but no thanks. And that limits the potential damage that you can do to your finances if there's only so much you can put on the card. Another option would be to get a secured credit card where you have to send in a deposit to use the card, and your credit limit is typically the amount of your deposit. And so, for example, you could send in a deposit of, say, $300 or $400, and that would be your credit limit for that card. It otherwise functions just like any other credit card. But again, by keeping the credit limit low, you decrease the chance that you're going to hurt your finances with the credit card. Another option would be, say, a gas credit card, where you use it to put gas in your car. You pay it in full each month. There's only so much gasoline that you can buy, so the chances that you're going to charge up a huge bill are minimized. But the key there would be to pay off the card in full every single month. So there are some options to think about. All right, now I want to go to an interesting question that someone left on a voicemail, and it has to do with timeshares. Let me play it for you. Here it is.
I own a timeshare. I can no longer make payments on it, and I need to know how to release it without losing money.
So the first thing I should say is I have never purchased a timeshare. I've had plenty of phone calls, and maybe you've gotten them too, where they want to give us a free trip down to Orlando or somewhere so that they can try to sell us a timeshare. If you're thinking about buying a timeshare, my advice to you is run. They're not a good investment, and you get, like this gentleman, you get stuck in the timeshare, and you're trying to figure out how in the world you can get rid of it. I'm not a fan of timeshares, and if you do have a timeshare and you're trying to get out of it, the truth is getting out of a timeshare without losing any money is very, very difficult to do. Now, the first thing that I would say is you have to read your contract closely because there are different types of timeshares. And some timeshares, you're buying in effect a deed for that timeshare. You are the owner. But for other timeshares, they're leased, and there is a time period that's for this contract, and eventually it will expire. So you want to read your contract carefully to understand what type of timeshare you have. But if you are indeed the owner, then the question is going to be, how can you sell that timeshare without losing your shirt? And it may be difficult. There are a couple of options. One would be to contact the management company you bought it from. Now, they are not going to pay you full price for that timeshare, but they may be able to or may be willing to purchase the timeshare back at some amount that you find reasonable. Again, you're not going to get back what you paid for it, in my experience and from what I've read, but it may be an option. The other thing I would say is that there are a lot of scams around the selling of timeshares. There are a lot of companies out there that want to try to get timeshare owners to pay a fee up front before actually selling the timeshare. And they're really just playing off the desperation of folks who have found themselves in a timeshare. They're stuck. They're paying maintenance fees every year. Maybe they've borrowed money to buy the timeshare, so they're paying on that. And they're just desperate to get out from underneath this timeshare. And they play on those fears and then that desperation. They get you to pay some upfront fees, and then they never come through and sell the timeshare. And in fact, I did some research on this, and there's a lot of information by the Federal Trade Commission on just this issue. And so what I'm going to do in the show notes is include links to what I think is some great information from the FTC and others about timeshares in general and ways you might be able to get out from a timeshare if you find yourself stuck. Again, I've never purchased a timeshare, so I can't speak from experience, but I was able to find what I think is a lot of great information, and I will include that in the show notes. Okay, the next question comes from Brian, and it has to do with 0% credit cards. He writes, one other thing that I would find very helpful, if it exists, would be a list of credit cards that offer 0% interest and zero balance transfer fees for any period of time, even just 6 to 9 months would be helpful. So here's how a balance transfer card, 0% balance transfer card works. You can apply for the card, and during the application process, you can actually list your other credit card debts, high interest debts that you're trying to transfer. And then assuming they approve your credit card application, depending on the credit limit you're given, they will automatically transfer that debt off of your existing cards onto the new card at 0% interest. And the 0% interest offer only lasts for a set period of time. Brian alluded to 6 to 9 months. Today, the longest 0% offer that I'm aware of, it comes in at about 18 months. Discover offers that kind of option. So does Citibank. So does Capital One, 18 months. However, virtually all 0% credit cards, 0% balance transfer credit cards, charge a transfer fee. Typically, the transfer fee is 3%. So if you were going to transfer, let's say, $10,000 in debt that's on a high-rate card, you will pay 3% of that at the time of the transfer, and they'll usually just add it to your balance. Still a very good deal, particularly if you're paying 10 or 15 or 20% on your current cards, but most balance transfers are not free. There are, however, occasionally some 0% balance transfer offers that don't charge a balance transfer fee, and the one that I'm familiar with now is offered by Chase. Now, if the debt you're transferring currently resides on a Chase credit card, you will not be able to use this offer. You cannot transfer credit card debt from one card to another if both of them are issued by the same company. So you can't transfer a credit card balance, say, from one Chase credit card to another Chase credit card, or from one Citibank credit card to another Citibank credit card. But I will include in the show notes links to those balance transfer offers that you can check out if you'd like to. Our final question today comes from David, and he writes in saying, my 401k is maxed out for the year at $17,500 plus $5,500. Can I also contribute a total of $6,500 to a conventional IRA with after-tax money? I'm over 50. So this is a great question, and I get this question a lot. Can you contribute to a 401k and also an IRA? Now, when he says a conventional IRA with after-tax money, I'm guessing he means an IRA that's not deductible, but he may be referring to a Roth IRA. I'm not certain. But here's how it works. First of all, you can contribute to both a 401k and an IRA. You can max both out. The issue comes in whether or not you can deduct what you contribute to the IRA. If you have a 401k at work, whether you can deduct the contribution that you invest in an IRA depends on your income. And rather than trying to go through all those mind-numbing numbers, I will simply leave a link in the show notes so that if you're in that situation, you can check out the income limits and see what works for you. With a Roth IRA, they're not deductible. However, your income may disqualify you from opening up a Roth IRA. So you need to know those limits as well. And again, I'll leave those in the show notes. The other thing I'd say is if you're going to open up your IRA at like an online broker or say a Vanguard or at Betterment for that matter, they typically have folks that will help you with these questions and can walk you through this if you want just a little more peace of mind that you're doing this correctly. So I would encourage you to take advantage of those resources as well. But again, I'll leave links to some helpful information in the show notes. That brings the podcast to an end today. Tomorrow we'll be turning our attention to credit scores. But until then, remember you can email me at dr@DoughRoller.net. I read every email and respond to every email. You can leave a voicemail message for me with a question or comment. Just go to speakpipe.com/DoughRoller. You can get the show notes to this episode. Just go to DoughRoller.net/podcast 16. That's podcast followed by the number 16. You can subscribe to this podcast and leave a review of it. Just go to DoughRoller.net/iTunes. That will redirect you to the iTunes page where this podcast resides. And if you haven't already, please sign up for our weekly newsletter at DoughRoller.net/newsletter. We send it out every week. It's Saturday, 8 p.m. and a packet full of resources and tips to help you make the most of your money. So until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.